Hey guys, welcome to the final part of chapter 3 of the Indian Easements Act. This is Lawve and I'm a host Akash. I'm a 4th year law student in South Calcutta Law College. So till now we have completed chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the Indian Easements Act and up to section 27 of chapter 3. So today we'll be starting with chapter 28, which talks about extent of easement. Then section 29, which talks about increase in easement. Then section 30, which talks about partition of a dominant heritage. And finally, we'll talk about section 31, which gives provision in case of excessive user of an easement right. And with that, we'll complete chapter 3 of this act. So without any further ado, let's just dive in. After this intro that will play now. Okay, so starting with section 28 of the Act. Section 28 talks about extent of the easement rights. So, if you are enjoying an easement right, any dominant owner is using an easement right, there has to be a limit to that right? Otherwise, what will happen that this dominant owner will keep on increasing the burden on the servant heritage, which is something obviously that the law cannot allow. So this section deals with that limit. To do that, this section divides easement into two broad categories. Firstly, easement of necessity and other is other easements, because none of them deserve any kind of distinction. I'm just kidding. These other kind of easements are then subdivided into 5 different categories in the later part of the section, but we'll deal with that later. Firstly, let's talk about the extent of easement of necessity. An easement of necessity is coextensive with the necessity as it existed when the easement was imposed. It basically means that as long as there exists the necessity, the easement right also exists. So suppose I have a right of way, an easement right of way over your land to get into my house. Now this is a necessary easement because there is no other way from my house to get into the road other than using your land or your property, your house. Now this right will exist as long as this necessity exists. As soon as another road opens up which connects me to the road which I can use to get into the road without using your land, my easement right of way over your land ceases to exist. So basically the necessity and the necessary easement are like those forever lovers. As long as you are there for me, I'll be there for you. Alright, now moving on to other easements. So even before subdividing these other kinds of easements, the section provides that for any of these easements, that is any easement other than necessary easement, the extent of them will be decided in reference to the probable intention of the parties and the purpose of the easement. Alright, now firstly, right of way. What is the extent of a right of way? Now firstly understand that this right of way is right of way by grant or by prescription and not right of way by necessity, because any easement right by necessity will be dealt in the previous previous part of this section, as I have told, and there it will be dealt accordingly. But this right of way we're talking about is right of way by grant or by prescription. So according to this section, a right of way of any one kind does not include a right of way of any other kind. So let's say this is a NH, a national highway, and this is another land that goes to, suppose, the town market, local town market, a town that is set beside the national highway. Now in this land between these two roads, the national highway and the local town road, are these two houses, house A and house B. Now the owner of house B allows the owner of house A to use his own property to get into the local town road for getting into the town market and stuff like that, local use. Because it will be very cumbersome for the owner of house A to get into the NH for any purpose of getting into the town. We first have to get into NH, then walk to a by road that connects the NH to this particular road, and then through that go to the market or whatever work he has to do within the town. So on humanitarian grounds, the owner of house B allows the owner of house A to use his plot to get into this town road and go inside the town for whatsoever purposes. Understand that this right is for walking into house A. B has allowed A to walk through his land and get into house A. Now suppose the owner of house A buys a car, but he will not automatically acquire the right of getting his car through house B to his own property from that local town road, even if there is space in house B for letting that car inside house A. For that, he will need to take express permission from the owner of house B. So, an easement right of way of one kind, walking in, will not include an easement right of way of another kind, taking his car through the property into his own property. For that, he will need to take permission separately, and that will be a separate easement right of way. Even though in these two cases of right of way, the dominant and the servient owner and the dominant and the servient heritage both are same. But still, this will be two different right of ways and not one single. Okay, next, pretty simple. Extent of easement right of light and air by grant. Now, by grant, it means both testamentary and non-testamentary transfers, that is both by will or by any inter vivos instrument, for example, say gift. Now, according to this section, the extent of such an easement will be limited to the amount of right and air that was passing at the time of the death of the testator or at the time of the instrument of that non-testamentary transfer. So, the dominant owner will be allowed that much amount of light and air to be passed as was passing during the death of the testator if it is a transfer by will, or at the time the transfer instrument was made and nothing more than that. That will be his limit. Alright, now for prescriptive right of easement of light and air. The limit of this is the amount of light and air that was passing for the whole of the prescriptive period, that is 20 years. Doesn't matter if the whole of the light and air was put to any use or not. Whatever was passing through all these years will be the extent or limit of the easement right of light and air by prescription. Quite similarly, in case of pollution of air or water, prescriptive right of easement of pollution of air and water, the amount of pollution that was done on the commencement of the period at the end of which the prescription is acquired is the limit or extent of such a pollution or such a right of polluting the air and water. And as for any other kind of prescriptive easement, how the accustomed user has been using the right over these years is what kind of decides the extent of that particular easement. Now section 29. It says that the dominant owner merely by adding or altering to the dominant heritage cannot substantially increase the easement right. Suppose I have a mill beside the bank of any river and I have acquired the easement right of drawing water from the river to my mill for the purpose of functioning of my mill. Now I change the machinery of my mill. Now this new machinery, it requires substantially more water than was required in the previous machine. Now I will not be allowed to draw more water than I was previously allowed to from that river for the purpose of functioning of my machine, because I have made addition and alteration to my dominant heritage by changing the machine, but that will not make me eligible to draw more water, or that will not make me eligible to increase the easement. But there is an exception. In case of an easement by grant, where it is agreed that the extent of the easement is proportional to the extent of the dominant heritage, in that case, if suppose the land, the dominant heritage, is increased by alluvion or decreased by deluvion, which basically means increasing of the land by natural deposition of soil or decreasing of land by erosion. It happens in suppose coastal areas or hilly areas, in river banks. In such areas, if there is natural alluvion or deluvion, in that case only, and that is the only case when the easement right can be increased or decreased proportionately. So just for example, suppose A has this land and he waters his land from this well owned by B. This is the easement by grant. B has expressly granted A the right to draw water from his well. Now this plot is beside this river. Now due to alluvion, that is natural silting, the river shifts to the other side and this piece of new land has risen beside the old plot of land of A. Now this land can be regarded as an extension of the land that was already existing, the plot of A. This is an extension of that plot. Now in this case, A can actually draw more water proportionate to the increase of his land to water the extended portion of this land. This was a easement by grant, and suppose they had the agreement that this easement right is proportional to the extent of the dominant heritage, and now the dominant heritage has actually increased. So now the easement right will also proportionately increase, and now A can draw more water from the well of B to proportionately water the extended piece of land. Right, so section 30. When the partition of a dominant heritage takes place, what happens to the easement right annexed to it? Usually the easement right get annexed to each of the shares. That is, the easement right is now acquired by each of the new dominant owners of the properties that has been created by partition of the original dominant heritage. But 2 points. Firstly, it should be consistent with the terms of the partition decree or whatever decree caused that partition. And number 2, it should not substantially increase the burden on the servant heritage. Now a very good example would be, suppose owner of property A had an easement right of drawing 50 buckets of water from the well in property B. Now property A is divided into two properties, property A1 and A2 by partition. Now the owners of property A1 and A2 are entitled to draw 50 buckets of water each in respect to their own properties, but the total amount of drawn water should not exceed 50 buckets. So it means that the total amount of water that needs to be drawn from the well in property B, that is capped at 50, but the division of this 50 buckets between the owner of property A1 and A2 can be anything. It can be 25-25, it can be 30-20, 40-10, 49-1, or even 50-0. But the total limit should be 50, and among these 50, the two owners of property A1 and A2 can draw whatever proportion they want to. Now, if the easement right annexed to the original dominant heritage is acquired by prescription, in that case, after partition, the right will be vested on the owner who originally used that easement right and who gained that easement right by using them over the prescriptive period, and not to each of the new owners. But obviously, if each of the new owners, all the new owners use that easement right, then that can be vested in all of them. The basic simple theory is whoever used the easement right during the prescriptive period, if the easement right has now been acquired by prescription and the dominant heritage has been partitioned, all the owners that use that easement right for the prescriptive period shall now continue to use the easement right. Okay, so the last topic of this chapter and today's video, section 31. It basically says that if the dominant owner uses the easement right in excess of what he was supposed to, then the servant owner is entitled to stop him from such usage, but he should not interfere with the lawful usage of the easement that the dominant owner is entitled. Now this last part of this section is the most important part. The first part of the section is very simple. Suppose if I am entitled to take 50 buckets of water from your well every day and I start taking 60, then you are allowed to stop me from taking those extra 60 buckets. But you cannot interfere or stop me or obstruct me from taking my entitled 50 buckets. You can only stop me from taking those extra 10 buckets. Now suppose in any particular case the dominant owner uses the easement right in excess to what he was supposed to. But if it so happens that interfering with that excess right, usage of that excess right will interfere with the lawful enjoyment of the original easement right, for maybe because they are so much intertwined with each other, then that excess right cannot be interfered with. For example, suppose A has the right of passage over B's property of light to his 4 windows. Now suppose he increases the number of windows in his house. Now it will be impossible for B to obstruct this extra usage of light in those extra windows without interfering with the light falling on the original windows, on the windows to which A is entitled to get light. And hence, in this case, even though there is excessive use of the easement right, B cannot interfere with that excess use of right, because interfering with that will automatically make him interfere in the usage of the original easement right, and hence that is prohibited by section 31 of the Indian Easements Act. Okay, so that's it for this video. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you think the video was good and you think the channel is doing well respectively, and obviously press the bell icon to receive notifications whenever I upload the next videos. The next videos on easement is coming very soon, and so do some other exciting stuff, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then, remember, the best time to make friends is before you need them. Bye.